Well, I have an article about the cold snap and the southern pine beetle. Unfortunately, it's not all good news, according to this article here from the East Hampton Press. I wasn't able to find this article anywhere else, but this is Napiog is lined with dead and down trees. The southern pine beetle will likely face mortality rates of about 40%. So it'll be 40% mortality rate here. So around 40% of the southern pine beetle population on the South Fork will die during the ongoing cold snap. But according to a local expert, the insect will quickly bounce back and the frigid temperatures won't have lasting impacts. First detected in Hampton Bays in 2014, the southern pine beetle is an invasive insect that has carved up local pitch pine forests. Since the initial detection, the pine beetle has marched east, making itself known in East Hampton Town, where its impacts can be seen at Napiog State Park, which is lined with dead and down trees and now burn piles. So this is what the satellite view looks like. You can see the area that is affected there. And that satellite image, I don't know when it was taken. For weeks, the South Fork has been beset with frigid temperatures as snow has piled up, with air temperatures dipping into the single digits and strong winds compounding the already extreme weather. But these freezing temperatures are unlikely to have lasting impacts on the southern pine beetle, as the cold will not eradicate the population completely, and those that survive will recover quickly, likely in a matter of months. Cold temperatures affect southern pine beetle RSPB mortality, but not as much as you would probably think and hope, said East Hampton Town senior environmental analyst Andy Drake. Since their habitat is insulated under the tree bark, the temperatures they get are slightly higher than outside. This is a reason why, when felling trees for suppression purposes, we always score the bark to introduce dormant beetles to the outside elements. State Department of Environmental Conservation Forest Health researcher Jessica Cancellieri has studied the impacts of cold and southern pine beetle populations. A few years back, for instance, Drake went on to her to learn about how the cold affects the pine beetle. When a cold snap hits what happens when a cold snap hits is a piece of the southern pine beetle population dies proportionate to the extent of the cold. Cold-related pine beetle deaths begin at about 20 degrees. When the temperature dips to 0 degrees Fahrenheit, about 50% of the population would die. So we didn't really get to zero. You got to remember the cold weather we've had has been remarkable in its staying power, but we haven't really broken many records as far as lows go. I think it only happened once. Temperatures would need to reach around negative 16 for a 2-day stretch to kill 100% of the southern pine beetle population on the South Fork, which I don't think has ever happened here before. We did have a cold snap years ago in February, and we did show that that caused pretty significant mortality, said Cancellier. But it's not going to be enough, unfortunately. I don't think the public always totally understands that. But it's just not a pest that you can control and get rid of. Recent years have seen state and local officials shift from actively trying to suppress the southern pine, the pine beetle, to looking to mitigate the impacts when it does pop up. That involves thinning forests and reducing fire fuel density. At the local level, East Hampton Town officials have sought to mitigate the impacts of the southern pine beetle on town lands by hiring a contractor to clear fire roads and reduce fuel load in areas like Buckskill Meadow. As for the cold snap, researchers originally worked on the model for the conditions of the pine beetle mortality in a lab. But Cancelliera tested it on Long Island a few years back during a cold snap and found that it was very accurate for the elements outside. The recent cold snap saw temperatures in Bridgehampton dip to 4 degrees on January 31st, according to the National Weather Service, which would cause about 40 to 45% mortality for southern pine beetle populations. Lasting damage to southern pine beetle populations would come at 97 and 98% mortality rates. And again, we would need some very, very cold weather to have that. We need to go below zero, basically. And we haven't done it, even though we've had a lot of cold weather. We haven't gone below zero, except obviously in a few select areas that get excellent radiational cooling. So the numbers in question are not high enough on their own to impart lasting damage to the southern pine beetle populations. They are further complicated by the way the pine beetle burrows into the bark of a tree, which essentially warms the pine beetle like a blanket, making the beetle around 3 to 6 degrees warmer than the temperature would be outside the tree. You can see there's a picture of the larvae that are in there. Southern pine beetle is pretty cold tolerant, and it's also residing in the foam or outer bark of a tree, and there's some thermal buffering that happens there. So if it's 4 degrees outside, what temperature is the beetle experiencing? There's usually a difference of like 3 to 6 degrees or so. And of course, the alley is even warmer than that, much warmer usually. But anyway, so even if it hits these critical thresholds in the air, there's a chance that the beetle is not experiencing that. Researchers have found that warm winters, not cold winters, have seen higher mortality rates for the southern pine beetle. This is kind of interesting. As for why, Chancellor said there are many aspects to the pine beetle's behavior that are not understood, and other factors like drought can add additional dynamics. Aside from the natural tolerance to the cold, southern pine beetles also rebound quickly because the insect produces multiple generations per year, meaning a new generation typically emerges in the spring, jumps to a neighboring tree, and begins reproducing right away. Typically, 3 generations spawn per year in New York. Anything above 80% is a great reduction in the population, but the problem is they are able to rebound quite quickly, reproducing multiple generations in a single season. The duration of frigid conditions is largely irrelevant. Far more important than the duration are the conditions themselves, meaning a 2-week period of frigid temperatures would have a similar impact as a 2-day cold snap that reaches the same depths. It all comes down to one temperature on one night with southern pine beetle, Consolari said. It's not like a trend over the week. It's what is the minimum temperature of the coldest night of the year. And that's all it takes for that. If you could just reach some of these critical temperatures, once can be enough. And so, yes, if we could go below 0, it would be help. Like I said, we've had a lot of cold air. Not going to say we haven't, but as cold as it's been, I remember in '96 we had much colder air masses, and particularly going below 0, and we've really not gotten below 0 yet. All right, only in some select spots where there was radiational cooling, but not a cold air advection type of below 0. So, but we'll see. The winter's not over yet, and we might get some more cold weather. I still think it's going to help, but it's not going to eradicate. It's going to help control them a little bit, but it's not going to help eradicate the southern pine beetle. So we still have to do our management here. And New Jersey does a much better job of that. We need to be more like New Jersey, as we know. We need more controlled burns and all that other stuff. So anyway, I'll put the link to this article in the description of the video. Thanks for watching.